Two cops thought they could get away with humiliating a disabled woman in the middle of the town, until they discovered who she really was, and their world came crashing down. In a small town nestled in South Carolina, life was slow-paced, but everyone knew each other's business. It was the type of town where the police force ran things, and everyone knew the cops didn't always follow the rules. But things were about to change. The town's new chief of police had arrived, bringing with him a sense of order that many people weren't sure they wanted. His name was Danny, and he'd been in law enforcement for years. He wasn't new to the job. He had worked in big cities and seen his share of trouble. But there was something different about this town that made it feel like a whole new challenge. Danny wasn't alone when he moved to this town. He had his wife, Naomi, by his side. Naomi was a black disabled woman, older than most of the officers in the town, and she had lived a life that had shaped her into someone strong, smart, and capable of handling anything life threw her way. Naomi wasn't just the wife of the new chief. She was someone who had seen the world from a unique perspective. She had lived with a disability for years, and though it made life more difficult, it had never stopped her from standing up for what was right. She was a woman who believed in justice, fairness, and equality, values she held dear and passed on to Danny. Danny's arrival as the new chief was meant to bring change. But Naomi, with her calm demeanor and unshakable belief in doing things the right way, was the real force behind the scenes. She understood the importance of respecting everyone in the community, no matter their background, and she made sure her voice was heard, even if people often underestimated her. At first, the locals didn't know much about Naomi. Most people assumed she was just Danny's wife, a quiet presence in the background. But Naomi wasn't the type to stay in the shadows. She knew the dynamics of small towns, the way people would try to push others around just because they thought they could. She had seen it happen before, and she wasn't going to let it happen in her new town. As the wife of the chief of police, she knew she had a unique position to make a difference. Naomi made it clear to everyone she met that she wasn't someone to be ignored or pushed aside. The police force in this town wasn't exactly known for being the most professional. The officers were tight-knit, rebellious, and loved playing by their own rules. They took pride in their control over the town, and many of them were not too happy about the idea of a new chief coming in to enforce change. But Naomi wasn't worried. She understood the challenge ahead, and she knew that if the change was going to come, it would have to start with respect. Respect for everyone, no matter their position or background. Little did the locals know, Naomi's calm presence would soon play a huge role in bringing justice to a town that had long been ruled by its own set of twisted traditions. One morning, Naomi decided to take a stroll through the town. She had seen the streets of this small town from her window but hadn't really walked through them yet. She wanted to get a feel for the place, the people, and maybe find a quiet spot where she could sit and think. Naomi knew the town wasn't the most welcoming, especially to newcomers, but she didn't mind. She had dealt with worse in her life. Besides, she wasn't one to hide away. She walked slowly, taking in the sights, the old buildings, the small-town shops, and the way people moved about their day, some nodding at her, others looking away as if she wasn't there. It wasn't anything new to Naomi. She had seen the way people treated outsiders. But today something felt different. As she walked down the main street, she noticed two cops, Jake and Mike, sitting in their patrol car parked by the side of the road. They weren't on duty, just lounging in their car, cracking jokes and laughing between themselves. Naomi paid them no mind at first. She had been around long enough to know that not all cops were the same, and these two didn't seem any different than the others. As she passed by, she overheard part of their conversation. They were talking about a new person in town, someone they thought didn't belong. Naomi didn't think much of it until she heard Jake's voice call out from the car. "Hey, old lady, lost or something?" he shouted, his voice loud enough for her to hear. "You don't look local. You sure you know where you're going?" Naomi stopped, her hand resting on the cane she carried with her. She didn't like the way they spoke to her, but she wasn't going to rise to the bait. She kept her head high and replied calmly, "Just taking a walk." The two officers looked at each other and laughed, clearly amused by her answer. Mike, the larger of the two, leaned out of the car and grinned. "You're not from around here, are you?" he sneered. "Strangers like you don't last long in this town." Naomi felt the heat rising in her chest. She had dealt with people like this before, and she wasn't going to let them get to her. But just as she started to walk away, they pulled a move she didn't expect. The two officers jumped out of their car and grabbed Naomi by the arms, yanking her forward without warning. Naomi tried to pull back, but they were too strong. They dragged her through the streets, ignoring her protests, their mocking laughter echoing in her ears. They didn't care who she was. To them, she was just another outsider to mess with. They weren't worried about the rules. They were just having fun, thinking it was harmless. They pulled her to the center of the town square, where people were going about their day. Naomi could hear the whispers and giggles as the crowd gathered. The officers tied her to a lamp post, her hands bound tightly with rope, all while continuing their taunts. "This is what happens when you don't know your place," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like we got ourselves a troublemaker." Mike chimed in, his voice louder. "Yeah, maybe she thought she could come in here and act like she owns the place." "Think again." Naomi's heart raced, but she kept her head high, staring at the crowd that was now filming the scene with their phones. These two men had no idea who they were messing with. They thought this was just some fun game. Little did they know they had just set off something far bigger than they could ever imagine. The incident in the town square didn't stay a secret for long. Within hours, the video of Naomi being tied to the lamppost had spread across social media. People had pulled out their phones and recorded the entire scene. It wasn't long before the video started circulating beyond the town, going viral. What had started as a cruel joke by two officers quickly became the talk of the town and soon after the entire state. At first, the people in the town reacted with mixed feelings. Some watched the video with a sense of disbelief, shaking their heads at the officers' behavior, while others laughed, treating it like some kind of local comedy. A few whispered to each other, recognizing Naomi as someone they had seen around, but nobody knew for sure who she really was. To most of the town, she was just another outsider who had become the target of Jake and Mike's twisted sense of humor. But as the video continued to spread, more people started asking questions. Who was this woman? Why was she treated like this? What had she done to deserve such humiliation? The comments under the video ranged from shocked and angry to curious, with many people demanding to know the story behind the scene. Some people were quick to jump to conclusions, labeling Naomi as a troublemaker or someone who had crossed the wrong line. Others began to speculate that the cops had gone too far and questioned their authority. As the video gained traction, local news stations picked up the story. A few journalists showed up in town trying to gather more details. The media frenzy grew quickly, and soon the reporters were everywhere, trying to get a statement from anyone who knew anything about the situation. The pressure on the town and its police department started to mount, and it was clear that the two officers who had tied Naomi to the pole had no idea how big a mess they had just caused. A reporter approached the town square, trying to interview some of the bystanders. "What did you see? Why was this woman tied to the pole?" the reporter asked a local who had witnessed the scene. "I don't know, man. Looks like the cops were just having some fun." "I don't think she did anything wrong," the local replied, shrugging. "But, they sure didn't know who she was." That was when the truth began to spread. Slowly, whispers started turning into shouts. Naomi wasn't just some outsider. She wasn't just an elderly disabled woman who had wandered into town. She was the wife of the new chief of police. Her husband, Danny, had only just started his role as chief of the department, and no one in the town had connected the dots until now. The revelation hit like a bombshell. People who had laughed or shrugged off the situation now saw it in a completely different light. The two officers had not just disrespected a random stranger, they had humiliated the wife of their new boss. The backlash was swift and harsh. People began to demand justice. How could two officers, sworn to serve and protect, treat a woman like this without facing any consequences? What started as a simple prank by the two officers quickly turned into a full-blown scandal. The town's dirty laundry was out in the open, and now everyone was watching. As the news spread, public opinion shifted. The jokes stopped and anger took over. Jake and Mike had made a huge mistake, and the whole town was about to find out just how big. The next morning, Naomi walked into the police station with a quiet, determined look on her face. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. But she was done being underestimated. The whole town knew what had happened now, and it wasn't just the two officers who had embarrassed her, it was the entire town that was watching. Naomi wasn't going to let this slide. She was going to make sure that what happened to her didn't happen to anyone else. Inside the station, Jake and Mike were sitting at their desks, still unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. They were talking and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that their little stunt had turned into a scandal. They had no idea that Naomi had walked through the doors, ready to make them pay for their actions. Then the door to the office opened. Naomi stepped inside, standing tall with the kind of presence that demanded attention. She wasn't wearing her usual clothes. Today she was in her best suit, her hair neatly tied back, and she walked in like she owned the place. It didn't take long for Jake and Mike to look up and realize who was standing there. The room went silent. Mike's face turned pale as he recognized her. Jake froze, his smirk fading as quickly as it had appeared. For the first time they were the ones being watched. Naomi stood there, unmoving, while the tension in the room grew. No one spoke. The other officers in the room stared at the two men, waiting for something to happen. Finally Naomi spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "I hope you two enjoyed the show yesterday," she said. "But it's over now." Jake opened his mouth to say something, but Naomi didn't let him. "Save it, Jake," she said, cutting him off. "You two thought you were having fun, didn't you? Well, I'm here to tell you that it wasn't funny. And now there will be consequences." She glanced around the room, making sure every officer heard her words. "You two," Naomi said, pointing at Jake and Mike, "are a disgrace to this badge. You've made a mockery of this town, of this department, and of the people you swore to protect. This behavior will not be tolerated." Danny, the new chief of police, walked into the room just as Naomi finished speaking. He had been quietly listening from the doorway, his presence commanding the respect of everyone in the room. He walked over to the desk and placed his badge on the table in front of him. With a look of determination he addressed Jake and Mike. "You two," Danny began, "have crossed a line. You thought you could bully and humiliate someone because you didn't think they mattered. Well, I'm here to show you just how wrong you were." Danny reached into his desk drawer and pulled out 2 termination papers. Without a word, he handed one to each officer. "Jake, Mike, hand over your badges," Danny said. "Your time here is done." The 2 officers stood there, frozen, as the weight of their actions hit them. The rest of the room was silent. No one spoke, but everyone understood what was happening. This wasn't just about 2 bad cops being punished, it was about setting the tone for what was to come. From this moment on, this department was going to be different. After Jake and Mike left the station, the fallout didn't end. The prosecutor's office got involved, launching an investigation into everything the 2 officers had done while they were on the force. Every questionable arrest, every complaint against them was now under review. The town was demanding accountability for what had happened, and the prosecutor wasn't going to let it go. The officers' misconduct was about to be exposed, and the town was going to make sure they faced the consequences. Naomi watched as the department began to clean up its act. She knew the fight for justice wasn't over, it had just begun. But with Danny by her side and the support of the community, she was confident that this town was going to change for the better. As the days went by, the town began to change. What had started as a single terrible act of disrespect had turned into a movement for accountability and justice. People who had once kept quiet now found their voices. They didn't want to live in a place where officers could treat others like that without facing any consequences. The whole town was demanding change. Danny, the new chief of police, made it clear that things were going to be different from now on. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was committed to making the police force something the town could be proud of. He made sure that every officer understood what was expected of them, not just in terms of enforcing the law but also in terms of respect. Naomi played a big role in the changes that followed. She wasn't just the chief's wife, she was a part of the community, someone who had lived through challenges and knew how important it was to stand up for what was right. She worked closely with Danny to help rebuild trust in the department. Together they held meetings with the community, listened to people's concerns, and made sure that the officers knew their jobs were not just about power, but about service and respect. The firing of Jake and Mike sent a clear message to everyone. No one was above the law. The town now knew that their police force would not tolerate bullying or abuse. With the support of the community and the leadership of Danny and Naomi, the town was on its way to becoming a place where everyone was treated with fairness and dignity.